Hello, everybody. Welcome to Real Talk in Real Time, creating an instrument to measure parent support effectiveness. We are delighted today with presenters. Because of our technical difficulties, we're hoping that a couple other people are able to join us. We have Nicole Friend from Wichita State University, Jane Adams from Keys for Networking, Barbara Hoff as well. It's wonderful to see you all. And we have Lori McDonald, who's from the Wyandotte Center for Mental Health. And we're looking forward to hearing from Amber McMurray and Marshane Grant, who are families who have participated in the development of this instrument. So it's been a process. We're going to learn about that in a few minutes from Kansans Together, the Kansas System of Care. Next slide, please, Nicole. So this family leadership learning community is hosted by Fredla, a partner in the National TA Network for Children's Behavioral Health, operated by and coordinated through the University of Maryland. We are particularly grateful for their support throughout this time together today. And you can see that it was prepared under SAMHSA grant for systems of care work. Next slide. The learning objectives today are to learn how and why the instrument was developed, understand who the stakeholders were that were involved in the development, examine the challenges that were and are being met to continue making progress, and you'll get a chance to ask some questions and perhaps even offer some suggestions for now what's next. So thank you very much to all the presenters and to you participants for spending your time with us today. Thank you. Go ahead, Nicole.
Thanks, Pat. I appreciate that. Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Friend. I am in Wichita, Kansas at the Community Engagement Institute. And I'm very happy to be able to talk to you all today about pulling together this tool, and hopefully you will be able to implement some of these tactics or ideas and share some of your thoughts with us so that we can make it stronger and even better. We did want to start talk a little bit about where we were coming from. Figuring that most folks don't know quite what the landscape in Kansas looks like other than flat. So we decided to talk a little bit about the different areas that are part of the Kansas System of Care. So the Kansas System of Care is actually composed of 4 catchment areas. The Compass Behavioral Health is in the southwest part of the state. We have 2 counties in the south central part of the state. You'll notice Wichita is not in one of those counties, but that's where I'm located, and Barbara too, and then Wyandotte County up in the Kansas City area of the state. And there is a really wide variety of environments that are encompassed by these areas. Kansas has a very wide range of urban areas, rural areas, and frontier areas. And so the Dighton, town of Dighton that you see over on the left-hand side of your screen there is more of a frontier area, whereas Wyandotte is a much more urban area. And I don't know, Lori, would you mind talking a little bit about what life is like in Kansas City, in the Wyandotte area, what your folks tend to deal with on a daily basis?
Yes, I work in Wyandotte County, and it is very diversified. There's a lot inner city kids that we work with. We work with families to make sure that they receive the services that they're entitled to. If there is a shortage, we'll go in and we'll help them find like extra food, clothing, utilities, to that capacity.
Excellent, thank you. Barbara and Jane, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about some of the more frontier counties and the families that you've talked about, how they experience life in Kansas.
Sure, I will for a minute. Hi, this is Jane Adams. Before I talk about anything, I want to say just a big hi and to tell you all that in Kansas today, at least in Northeast Kansas, Lori, maybe you agree with me or not, but we're having torrential, they say unusual, abnormal, torrential rain so bad that even in sort of flat Kansas, our streets are all flooded in Topeka. And we can't, people who ventured downtown can't get home, and those of us who didn't go into the office can't get there. And so I have not had internet up until a few minutes ago, and or electricity. So I'm like really excited to get to see y'all and think there's people out there today. So in Dayton and is very rural. I believe that Amber lives maybe okay, I'm going to say things that might not be quite true. Just disregard that part. Lives, I think, at least an hour, and I'm going to think maybe 2 hours from where she gets services. Barbara, nod if that's right. And so everything is very, very different. And the Kansas system of care had 4 different sites that were very, very different one from another. And probably the differentest could be the Green area and then the Kansas City, Kansas area. So people live a long ways apart. It's frontier for us. I don't know the exact numbers, but it means you usually can't see where your neighbors are. So I just wanted to, and Amber is raising her nephew who actually came from Kansas City. He's a family member, and she is, it's just really hard to find services and keep good services at school or at the mental health center. Barbara, what do you want to add? You're on mute,
Barbara.
Now, Jane and I actually, am I off mute now?
Yes, you are.
Yes.
You're great.
Okay. Jane and I actually went to Dayton to an IEP meeting with Amber, and it's a town of about maybe 1,000 people, would you say, Jane, or 500? I mean, it's really small, and it's about an hour also from Colorado. So it's way out there, and it's very definitely frontier. And she has really struggled to try to get the school to work with her, and also just the geographic issues of where the mental health center is located makes it really difficult. But the mental health center is in the system of care. It's one of these system of care counties.
And Barbara, I want to add something. I want to add something else. We asked Nicole and I and Lori and the parents we expect to join us, asked Barbara to join this call today because many of you likely know Barbara from her past work at the Federation of Families for Children's Mental Health. And when she retired and came back to Kansas, where she lives, she agreed to come back to work with me at the organization Keys for Networking that she founded in Kansas 30 years ago. And so Barbara has worked with this primarily, and so we really wanted to have her here today to say thank you, and thank you for coming back to Kansas, and thank you for all of the work organizing this and working with Nicole. And so I just wanted to say yay.
Oh, well, thank you. It was my pleasure, Nicole.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can definitively say that none of this would have happened without Barbara's help. So we are incredibly grateful to her for that.
Thank you, Nicole.
I want to just highlight when we're talking about...
Nicole, wait a second. Marshane, to call me, and she has no electricity or no internet. So,
Oh, no.
Okay.
so this is like Kansas.
Yes, it is.
This is how we operate.
You got to roll with the punches, right? And remain flexible. And so, well, and actually that segues, I don't want to say nicely, but it does segue into something that I want to highlight here, which is to say that having access to the things you need can be a widely varied experience across Kansas. And sometimes even in our state capital, it can be difficult to get electricity and internet when you need it. So that was kind of the purpose of sort of showing the breadth of this slide, is that there are a couple of urban centers, there's a lot of rural area, and then there are really some very frontier pieces that make your experience both in life and in getting the help that you need wildly, wildly different, which is part of why we wanted to start to think about how do we start to measure a little bit about what the differences in getting services might be like. So the purpose of this instrument was really to try and bring together in aggregate an understanding of the way parent support affects what people's experience is depending on where they are. And there's a lot of research out there to suggest that one's experience is based on zip code. We can't obviously study everything, but we thought this was something we could both study and affect positive change on. And Jane, I think you had the best perspective on what our impact hope to be and why it's important.
I do. I have to unclick my mute. You know that I saw on the internet this morning that the single most used phrase in the last 6 months is undo your mic. So here I am. The purpose of what we try to do, what we are playing with doing, is to improve services before that. It's, you know, sometimes I've been involved with the family organization, as so has Barbara, with, you know, like consumer satisfaction surveys. They were called years ago, but we would do them once a year, and by the time there was feedback to the center, even the staff had changed, the environment had changed, and so making use of them to actually improve a service was really almost impossible. And so this is was Nicole's idea, and about using the telephone to ask people after people received a service, and especially because well, Barbara and I have great fondness and interest and have worked all our lives, I think, with parent peer support. We wanted to use that service, and the people giving the service were eager to do it. And so we wanted a way that a family could say, this worked for me, or I needed something else. And so that's the purpose, is to give feedback quickly enough that it's useful to a person. And Lori on the phone is the provider of peer support. And so to be able to almost immediately feed information back so that staff can use it to make some decisions, and parents have a real voice that they're still alive or still getting services by the time, the information comes back. And so the immediacy of it actually makes it impactful. Nicole, is that what you wanted me to say?
It is. That's fantastic. I would like Lori's perspective on what she perceives the impact of this to be as someone who is providing that support. So as we think about the purpose of this tool and why it's important, Lori, can you talk a little bit about what you see the impact to be?
Yes, I think it's very important to have resources out there to be able to help the families when they are facing difficult times. And I know that Ms. Grant is not on the phone, but she had a lot of issues with our IEP. It took almost a year for the IEP to get completed because she kept on going around with the team. And some of the things that I saw and the people, the instructors, passing the pot, as we would call it, and not accepting the responsibility of their actions. And then we have a child who's consistently getting in trouble. Well, of course, something needs to be done because we need to keep our kids in school so they can receive their education. They are our future. So with that, I sat down with Miss Grant. I call her Miss Marchand. So we can formulate a plan. I gave her some suggestions because I'm not allowed to tell somebody what to do. So we give them suggestions, and she had a couple of things to pick from. And she decided to get in touch with Dr. Adams and her organization to be able to see what could be done in order to help her child and get the IEP completed. Am I still on?
Yep,
Hello?
You're doing great.
Oh, okay. I thought I got disconnected. I'm sorry. So with that process, Dr. Adams was able to guide and make sure that this young man received the information that he needed. So through that support, we was able to get a plan formulated. The child education got back on track. He's more engaged, doing better. He's not getting in trouble. So, yes, with us coming together, being able to work with one another and make sure that plans or regulations are implemented so no child is left behind. Every child gets an education, and we form a better community.
Thank you, Lori. So yeah, the impact of having something that you can really get feedback quickly probably would have shortened the time it took to get everybody on the same page and
Correct.
to get him what he needed. Is that fair?
That is. If we would have started from this on the correct foot, we wouldn't have gone. But I think it's a very valuable tool because I see so many kids who are running in or being suspended. We need to figure out in the community what is the base of the problem. And from what I'm seeing is that it's a lack of education, but parents don't have the resources to get that handle, and teachers don't want to deal with the behavior. So when we have this type of resource, it's incredible because then if all of us is working together, regardless of what angle is coming from, we coming up with a solution, it's a better impact for our communities.
Jane, did you want to ask?
Nicole, I'm an old teacher. I want to say something. I didn't think about it till just this second. And so, at my age, if I don't say it when I think it, it's like it's a goner. So just bear with me for a minute. It never dawned on me till just this second that we can use this for our organization. Nicole, we just need some help from you. I mean, like Lori said, and Amber and Marchand would have said, when we provide a service from the family organization, Nicole has developed a website for the system of care. Barbara's nodding. It would be so easy for us to say to people, would you just respond to this? You can use your cell phone or, anyway. So I think we need to talk about doing this for ourselves, because us too, like once a year we'll send out or make calls to people and say, what do you think about what you got from us? But this, I think this is now a fabulous idea, and we're going to do this. What do you think, Barbara?
Well, and that
am I on mute or am I off mute?
You're off mute.
Okay. I can't tell, really. I'm too old for this. I think it's a great idea. I'd never actually thought about it either, but again, it's that real time, getting information quickly and being able to do mid-course correction just right then. And I know Mrs. Grant Marchand, who loves Lori as her parent support provider, loves Lori. And Lori was so able to get her connected to the resources that she needed. And so, and everybody kind of knew that, but it would be really neat, to be able to have that as data, it's one thing for me to know that Marchand loves Lori and loves the work that she's done for her, but it's another thing to have it as a piece of real data. And so, Jane, I also think it's a great idea for family organizations. You're right on. I hadn't thought of that either.
Nicole, Pat, I'm seeing some questions in the chat. Could we talk about those?
I'm okay to talk about them now, or we can talk about them at the end.
Your choice, my friend.
Well, why don't we get through how we developed everything and see if some of those questions get answered, and then we'll talk. We can answer as many questions as we can get to in that time. So Jane, your epiphany just now actually is part of how we started to develop this anyway, because it was your tracking, the tracking from your volunteers who were helping families, that sort of inspired us to go down this path, because Keys provided training for the Compass Behavioral Health Center on peer support, or parent support rather, and it was through discussion around that training and how you tracked at Keys your impact with families that really sent us down this path to try and create this tool. So do you want to talk a little bit about the training for parent support that you provided to Compass?
Okay, sure. And before I do that, there's one chat question just sitting here that I have to answer, because it says I'm confused, and I kind of live my life that way. And so I just want to say that the instrument, the tool, is simple. It was a cell phone. And so, and then we'll talk in a minute. This is like an advertisement, like they do on the news. We want you to come back. And then Nicole developed, as a major researcher at the Wichita State University, she developed the tool that's the questions and the website puts them on. So that's the answer to that. The question Nicole asked me to talk about was, when we work with families, and if you are an old timer on this call, you've heard me talk about this probably since we were all young people. Barbara and I go back 30 years at this stuff, and so anybody wants to venture into a show of hands, or how about in the chat box about who else here is a senior member of the family movement? We'd like to know that. Anyway, all we did at Keys was, for when we train people, we wanted to see what happens with that training. And so we developed, and I'll share it with anybody who wants to see it if you just say so in the chat and they have your address, is kind of a 1 to 10 marker system. So to look at whether and how engaged people are, or do they use the information and so it's an evaluation of us. It's not an evaluation of them. It's, do they find the information we give them useful enough to use it? Do they feel that they've been able to actually have some success with it? And then do they do like Marshane and Amber did with us? You know, do they care to get involved in some of the kind of planning that's around, you know, bigger issues than their own child? And so I'll share that with anybody. Many of you have seen it on this adventure today, but I'll be glad to share it all over again or get Pat to host a call and we'll just talk about that. How's that, Nicole?
That's perfect. So yeah, so that that tracking work and that training work led the System of Care Evaluation Committee. So we call our evaluation committee the Discovery for Success Committee. And the representative from Compass said, this was so beneficial to us to have Jane talk about this training and then the way that they track impact. Is there a way we could do that for all of System of Care? And so we took that tracking information that, that Keys was using and looked also at some of the published literature around parent support and what's important in parent support, and created a tool that really worked to balance, you know, making sure families had the opportunity to share whether they felt like they were getting what they needed, and it gave the parent support worker an opportunity to evaluate how they felt the visits were going. So I'm going to give you I mentioned in the chat that the questions themselves are still evolving a little bit based on the feedback, and we'll talk a little bit about that feedback and how that is impacting the instrument in a minute. But the original questions, which will be important as we look into the next piece of this process, the original questions that we asked the family were, describe how you feel today's visit went, and they could pick anything from I felt it went very well to this visit wasn't what I hoped it would be. And then the other question was, what, if anything, can the support worker do to be more helpful? And then those were the only two questions that we asked families, because we did not want to burden families with a whole bunch of survey questions. All of us on a regular day don't have time for surveys. We wanted to make sure that this was fast, that it was easy and able to be asked very, very quickly and efficiently. The rest of the questions were for the parent support worker. And that parent support worker was asked whether or not the family was enrolled in System of Care, because even within those catchment areas, not every parent support interaction was going to be between someone who was receiving services through System of Care and someone who was receiving services through a different mechanism. So we asked about that, and then we also asked a little bit about whether the child was living at home, whether the child was attending school, what the main support activity was, and then what the parent support worker felt was needed for this family. So that was the pilot instrument that you see here, and the results from that pilot, and please don't try and read that picture. That is an actual screen capture from our results, but I don't expect anyone to look at that. That's just a representation of the data. So please don't try to read that. What we found was that there was a preponderance of NA under that second question of how could we be more helpful. And that just led us to think families don't necessarily know what they don't know. It was an unfair question to ask at that point. We found that systematically this was an easy tool to use because parent support staff were able to complete it within usually a couple of days of doing a visit. Almost all of the families were looking for behavior help and just what they called support, which led us to believe that we needed to maybe look at how we were defining those things. And most people said that they looked forward to the visits and that the visits tended to go very well, pretty well, or okay. Nobody really said that it was nothing like they wanted. But we really felt like we had missed something vital when we came to when we got these results, and so many people said they didn't know how to answer that "how could we be more helpful" piece. So when we think about what did we learn, we learned that the service was essential. Nobody said that they didn't want the service. Nobody said that they didn't look forward to the service, but that it was really important. We learned that the instrument needed some adjustment. And we learned that there were some improvements that we could make to all of these things, services, instrument, and administration, and that we needed to start looking into that. So the benefits were that it absolutely became this timely, real-time feedback that we could get to the parent support workers and to the other stakeholders that they that were a part of this. It was direct, so it didn't go through a bunch of administrative levels to get down to some sort of aggregate report. It was from families to support workers. We heard the voices that people needed to express themselves. So when we talk about validation, people felt validated for being asked these questions. Not a statistical validation. We're not talking about normal distributions or anything like that. What we're talking about when we say validation is that people felt heard. And that's not something that they always say they feel, especially if you look at some of those quality assurance surveys that are a year out, right? They sometimes report that they feel heard, but this was something we heard loud and clear. We did find some challenges to administration. So as Jane mentioned, this is actually built in a Qualtrics format. So what that means is that it is mobile compliant, so you can do it on your phone. What we discovered was in some of those frontier areas, especially in western Kansas, not even a cell signal gets out there. So if you don't have a cell signal and you don't have Wi-Fi, or you don't have access to the Wi-Fi, then how do you complete this? And that is an administration challenge that we're still trying to work through a little bit. In terms of question clarity, I mentioned that we had missed the boat on that "what else can we do" business. So we knew that we needed to get some better clarity around some of those questions. And then we wanted to start looking at actionability. So now that we've got this information, we've got it in real time, it can be incredibly helpful to the people providing these services. How do we get it into the right hands at the right time and make it really, truly actionable? Which leads us to phase 2. And here is where the families really, and Lori in particular, really came in and did the heavy lifting. And this is also where Barbara sort of did the heavy lifting when it came to talking to families and making sure that we were doing what we wanted to do. So we looked at the open-ended results. In our Discovery for Success committee, we reviewed what was happening, and we all just decided that what we really needed was feedback from families. And so I would say, Jane, if you want to talk, or Barbara, either one want to talk a little bit about your approach to recruiting the folks who helped us refine this. And Lori, I'd also, after they talk a little bit about that, I'd love for your discussion of how you contributed to this process as well.
You want me to do that, Jane? Jane and I did it together. We had 4 family members and 4 that were receiving parent support services and 4 providers that were providing parent support services. And we had geographic diversity. We had a Hispanic parent support provider and a parent from 2 different places, one rural and one urban. And then we had Mrs. Grant and Lori, both African-American parents, and they were from the same community mental health center. And so we had urban, we had rural, we had Hispanic, and we had African-American. And interestingly enough, out in that rural area, there's a lot of Hispanic family members way out west. And so that was important that we get that perspective from rural and Hispanic as well. So we tried to get a real mix, and we did. And I did about 1-hour interviews with each provider and parent with questions that I ask. And you know, it's always interesting because you find out way more than you even thought you were going to when you got on the phone with families. And and there were huge socioeconomic differences too. So Jane, do you want to add to that? Jane and I definitely did the selection together.
You're muted, Jane. You're still muted.
You're muted on the computer, Jane.
I'm glad I'm not the only one.
It's happened to all of us. There you are. Oh, except we can't.
No, not yet.
Click the button on the computer, Jane. Okay, you're good on the computer. Try to unmute yourself on your phone.
How's that?
Yeah,
there you go.
Yay.
Oh. Okay, Marshane is available by phone, and if one of you will unmute her, she will talk about this. And that must mean she's got some reception and stuff is working in Kansas City. And while we're
Hello?
There she is.
Marshane, my dear.
Yes, I'm here finally.
you get the persistence award, okay?
Okay. So,
Mr. Clinton, do you want to talk a little bit about how you contributed to making this school work?
no, I didn't hear you. What did you say?
Do you want to talk a little bit about how you were part of this project with Barbara and Jane?
Yes. I became a part of it when it had to do with my grandson. I have a grandson that I'm raising since birth. And he's special needs and had a lot of problems and issues going on. So that's how I came in contact with Jane when I couldn't get no further in this program with the school district and the school, teachers and stuff. So, they helped me out a lot with it. They did, and I just decided to do whatever I could to help anybody that's going through what I went through, because I don't want nobody else to have to go through what I went through for a whole school year. So that's why I decided to get in to deal with this. You know what I'm saying? And get in with Dr. Jane and all that and help whoever I could help.
And Marshane, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been asked or been part of any kind of thing that through this center or through the school or where you were asked to be part of a planning for more than your own child?
No, outside of working with you guys. You know what I'm saying? But nobody has never asked me nothing like that outside of you guys, just helping you guys out with this, because I feel it's a good thing. Because if the things we discussed and talked about could help somebody else, you know what I'm saying? Because I didn't know what to do prior to this. I did. And this program here y'all got going on, this what we've been doing in the last couple of months, helped me out to find out a whole bunch to help my grandchild. Because there was a lot of things I did not know. I didn't. So that's why I feel that this is something they need to do for all kids that special needs, or provide for all kids that need the help. You know what I'm saying? When it comes to IEPs or just being disabled and dealing with the school system and the government and the doctors, the hospital, all the whole nine.
Thank you very much. Barbara didn't say this, but I want to say it. Barbara spent hours and hours talking to people individually and talking to people in groups so that we could provide the people who really need the services could provide real input into what the questions were, what they wish the questions were, and to make recommendations that Nicole has been fabulous to take into account and fix them. Marshane, I'm so glad you got on the call.
Yeah.
You know, I am too. Am I off mute, Nicole?
You are.
Okay. I just wanted to say that because Marshane, Mrs. Grant, and Lori had a good relationship with each other, it was really helpful to find out what they thought about the whole service of family support. But let me just tell you that I just could never have called Mrs. Grant cold and said, would you talk to me about this? Jane called her for me first and had her expecting to get the call. And so we had to build kind of a trusting relationship on the phone without knowing each other. Anyway, yeah, Mrs. Grant, and by the time we were done, I could call her, I could email her, and we were fine. But just know that we could have never done this on a cold call. And Lori, I think Jane gave me your name also as Mrs. Grant's support provider. And so Mrs. Grant was able to tell you that I might be calling you. And so
yes,
there was a lot of kind of pre-work that had to build this before we just jumped in and did a cold call on family support and what people thought about it. And then, I just wanted to say that that's some of the time that goes into it. And then, as any of us know, by the time I was done listening to Mrs. Marchand, I knew everything that had happened over the last year with the school. So we had to get that out of the way first. Then we could talk about family support. But we had to get, and we all know that all of us in this family work know that that's the way it is. And that's how you build relationships with people and trust with people. And so now I think I could call Mrs. Grant or Lori, probably even. Lori was a little different. Because I think Lori was suspect of me, and I don't know why. But I had to be much more cautious with Lori than I did Mrs. Grant, for whatever reason that was, and that I felt like she was going to put me to the test. And if I passed, okay. Otherwise, don't call me back. So, anyway, it's all about trust and it's all about relationship building.
We all have to protect our time, right? So, yep, understandable. Lori, before we move on, I do want to have you talk a little bit about your contribution. Jane, did you have something you wanted to add?
Oh, you know it. I wanted to make sure that we met Mrs. Grant from the center. Lori works for the mental health center in Kansas City, and Lori called and said, we need some help, and we need everything we're trying to do, the school says no to. And so it's a real circle thing here. I mean, we didn't seek Lori and Mrs. Grant out. They called for help, and then we've all got involved in this. So it's a circle more than it's anything about how, so they're, I don't know how families, if we just called them cold and said, do you want to do this? And that we didn't even know, they know us, we didn't know anything about them. And so I think you have to do this through working with families that you're actually helping.
That's a good point, Jane. And then even that, they didn't know me at Keys. They knew Jane. So Jane set it up.
And I just have to add one more thing. Oh, I'm sorry. But, okay, Nicole showed you the map of Kansas and how, so, okay, I just want, some of you old timers will really appreciate this. So Barbara and I would drive to Wichita, and then Barbara and I would get in her little car and head for Dighton, and we would pretend like we were Thelma and Louise all the way out there and back. And some of you may have seen that movie.
Thelma and Louise.
That's all on your side.
Oh, Lori, you accidentally muted yourself instead of unmuting yourself.
So basically, this is all good information. I'm like, okay, what am I supposed to say? The impact, I think, is very critical that I played a dual role. I'm actually the case manager. Being a case manager, I think, is very important that as case manager, in order to help the child, you got to be able to help the family. So if one person is growing and the other person, the family members are not changing, then it's always going to be unbalanced. I've been working with the family, Miss Grant and her grandson, for about 2 years now. And so I've kind of been involved. So it's like if there was an issue at school, I go to school, I'll sit in the classes just to kind of see the behavior part of that, provide an intervention. And then like in the home, I would give suggestions. But it's always like I never went to the school at the same time, because sometimes I've seen that if people know that you're coming to visit or to pop in, the behaviors are different. But as far as the impact is concerned, I think that anybody who's receiving service should be able to, there should be information on the internet or to be able to say, hey, I need help, this is not going this way. What do I need to do? And I think that the information that we do find on the internet, a lot of it doesn't pertain to the kids who are needing the services or the families that needing specific services.
Thanks, Lori. Yeah, so it's really vital to have those different perspectives and those different experiences incorporated into how we ask families whether or not they're getting the help that they need. So We are now still incorporating a lot of that feedback, especially as it pertains to how do we ask this question right? And how do we ask this question in a way that is actionable on the results end of that, without necessarily overburdening, you know, a system that feels burdened already, right? So you can't have a bunch of open-ended questions and have to try and analyze, you know, hundreds or even thousands of open-ended questions before you get to an actionable result. So we're still trying to work through what some of that looks like. And so that's that, you know, feedback piece, and then we'll pilot that new instrument, and we can pilot it with the community mental health centers as well as with Keys, since Jane has already volunteered that they can be guinea pigs for the next round as well. I think it's important to talk a little bit about some of the caveats and limitations for what we've discovered so far. You know, we are talking about fairly small samples right now, and it is a new instrument with new data. So, you know, I mentioned earlier about validation not being about statistics. We're still building that piece of it. We're obviously much more interested at this point in people feeling validated by being asked questions they hadn't been asked before. But eventually, hopefully, we would be able to build data to the point where we could really say something about a generalized population. We're not there yet. We can't have a conversation about reaching out to people right now without talking about the very unique challenge associated with COVID-19. Parent support visits changed. Some of those became telehealth. Some of those just didn't happen. So, you know, there's certainly some challenges in piloting an evolved or new interested with the current circumstances that we happen to be in. We really want to make sure that something we create is sustainable, and sustainable in a way that makes it both useful for the people who are using it, but also sustainable beyond, say, a particular funder or a particular set of health centers or group of people. So I think that is something that we're still trying to consider as we move forward with this work. So when we think about our next steps in the evolution of this project, we're still problem solving. Some of the problems, and Mrs. Grant has been instrumental in pointing out some of the difficulties associated with how the instrument is administered. You know, she had mentioned in a conversation that we had that, you know, especially during COVID-19, who wants to touch somebody else's phone? That's not something somebody wants to do right now. So there are definitely problem-solving pieces. I think, you know, we want to make sure that everyone feels safe and comfortable in using this instrument. And I say safe and comfortable both from a public health standpoint as well as an emotional standpoint. We don't want families who are getting parent support to feel vulnerable in reporting something that maybe isn't as positive as the parent support person or the organization would like. We'd like to be able to integrate this into continuous improvement, and I think we'd really like, and this is definitely something that we would like feedback on, is how do we end up getting this information back into the hands of the people who can and will use it? So, you know, we've got the data, we aggregate it. Do we send text messages? Do we publish it on a website? How does getting that information back into people's hands and closing that feedback loop to make sure that the voices of families really get heard by as wide an audience as possible? How do we do that effectively? And that is, you know, that's a concern of a lot of research, is how do we get this information into the hands of the people who want it and need it? And that's really the end of the formal presentation. I would say I would invite that we can answer questions. I would say, Lori, Jane, and Barbara, if there's anything else you would like to add, or Mrs. Grant, if there's something you would like to add, we can certainly entertain that at this time. Hopefully we have been able to answer at least some of the questions, but I know our hosts have been watching the chat and will help us out with that.
So, Nicole, this is Pat Hunt, and I had a question up front because I don't think we spent a lot of time on it. How is the tool used? So a parent support provider works with a family, and then what? How do you get this information from the family?
So as I mentioned earlier, it's built in a Qualtrics online form. And so the parent support worker either has a hard copy that they take with them and they can enter it in using their phone when they get back to their car, or they can pull it up on their phone directly after they do their visit. So it's instantaneous in the sense that they have the instrument with them during the visit, and then either by mobile device or through paper and pencil, and then when they can get back to an online connection, they can enter that data there. Does that answer that question?
Yes, thank you.
Jane, you're on mute.
How about this?
Yes.
Okay, you can hear me. Okay, Pat, one of the things in the last meeting Barbara had with families was talk about how they would want to respond elsewise. And I don't know if Mrs. Grant is still available on the phone, but things they talked about were having multiple ways they could respond. And one was to be able to use their own computer to get into a website and respond. And Barbara and Nicole, what you were more part of that discussion than I was.
Now Barbara's on mute. There you go.
Am I off mute? Okay.
Yes.
This technology is real interesting for the mute thing. That's why we're all struggling. Just to tell you that everybody felt very strongly, all four parents and all four providers felt strongly that people should have choices about how they responded. And Amber out in rural Kansas said parents would never respond on the phone. You know, they are going to want to go sit at their kitchen table and do this later. And either Lori or Mrs. Grant said, what's wrong with providing a piece of paper and a pencil and with a self-addressed stamped envelope and letting them fill it out on paper and let them send it back in. So there were a variety. The COVID-19 thing had just started. And so I remember Lori also saying something about people not wanting to touch each other's phones. All the providers said that. And so there was a lot of discussion about whether the phone was the right mechanism, especially now today.
And then also, we did say that. Hello? Okay. We also did mention about having them given the site where they can go onto the computer and fill out the information.
Mm-hmm. All of you said that. that there needs to be choices. That would be one of them. Mm-hmm.
One of the questions early in your presentation was around, did you consider the culture of the family, including the native language, for comprehension when you developed this tool?
Initially, it was English only, except for when a parent support worker was bilingual and could translate it for the family they happened to be working with. I believe not long after I did get it translated, both the protocol and the instrument translated to Spanish. But Spanish was the only language, and that is for lack of a better phraseology, a universal Spanish, not a particular cultural or ethnic Spanish, depending on the area of origin for that particular family. I think there is some work that could be done around cultural and linguistic competency when it comes to this. I think we were trying to get something off the ground initially and were considerate of that, but there is definitely still work that can be done around cultural and linguistic competency when it comes to the questions in particular, and to the terminology that's used and how things are defined. So I guess the short answer to that question is a little bit, but not enough. And there's more work to be done there.
Thanks, Nicole. We had another question. Somebody asked, do you think this tool would be adaptable to parent engagement in schools for family support staff at schools for feedback and analysis?
I definitely think it could be adapted for that purpose. I think what would probably ultimately be the most the questions that you ask the family, I think would be pretty, it would translate across those use cases and purposes. The things that would probably change would be the individual questions that we ask the support worker. So like, for example, if it's in a parent engagement school situation, you're probably not asking, is this person in system of care? That's not a relevant question. But you might ask things like, is this child living at home? Is this child missing school? And all of those, those types of questions are ones that translate well into that particular situation. I don't know, Jane, did you have more you wanted to add on that? Oh dear, I can't hear you.
There, how's that? Okay, I'm just sitting here thinking that maybe for anybody, this might be kind of a teaser, but for those of you who might be really interested in exploring this in more depth or and really looking at stuff with us, I certainly offer our place, Keys for Networking, if Pat would convene us, but to look at how to really do this and form like a little study group. I mean, I think this gives you, I feel like this gives us just enough. And now that I said I want to commit our organization to it, now I need a lot more information myself about how it really works and what Nicole's part was. So I think some of us who are interested could work together and build on what Nicole has done, rather than everybody just start from zero.
I think that's a great idea, Jane.
Okay.
We had one other question that came in around what kind of bias do you think you have encountered due to the fact that the support specialist is in essence being evaluated at the same time they're also the data collector? Are parents comfortable with this?
So that was a primary concern. And it was something that when we talked in committee, in the Discovery for Success Committee specifically, we talked about that piece of it a lot. And so the original administrative protocol, the way that it had been conceived is those first two questions, the parent support worker hands the device or the sheet of paper, however it was. Again, remember, this is pre-COVID-19 at this point. But you hand the device or the paper to the parent. You get those first two questions, the one that says, how did it go, and what can we do to help more? You collect those, and then those, basically, the support worker's not supposed to see them. So ideally, what would happen is they would hand over the device, the parent would answer those questions, and then hit next, and then hand the device back to the parent support worker for the parent support worker to put in their information about the visit. And that, obviously, if you're using paper, it doesn't work quite the same way. If we separate those two pieces into completely different instruments, it's hard then to connect them back together in a meaningful way. And so it's a struggle. I mean, I'm not going to lie. It's not an easy nut to crack. And we did the best that we could. And I think we're still trying to explore, you know, those ways where parents can go to a computer and put in the information that they have. You know, do we have some sort of ID number that's associated with it so that that can be associated back? Bias, I think, and not necessarily bias, but really just safety. That was the emotional safety I mentioned earlier that we really wanted to make sure families felt, was we didn't want them to feel exposed or, you know, otherwise in a position that was uncomfortable to be able to give that really frank feedback. And not all of them would, and not all of the, you know, not everyone is going to have a bias or a feeling of not being safe in answering those questions. But you certainly want to try and plan for everyone, you know, the most number of people to feel safe and to feel like you've accounted for some of that potential bias. So it is a tricky wicket that we haven't quite, I think, in administration figured out technically when we're talking about these really wide variety of homes and geographies and areas. How do you account for all of that variation? Because the questions themselves, I think, you know, that's a relatively easy piece of feedback to get and to try and incorporate. But, you know, accounting for those vast, widely different situations and making sure that everyone just feels safe in being able to answer those questions is something that's really important that we haven't had a chance to feel like we've solved it.
Thank you, Nicole.
Nicole, may I try to say something?
Sure.
I think there's more of a problem than bias if we don't get feedback that's timely and useful from the people we serve. And I think that most of the feedback we procure is researchy kind of stuff, and rather than let's hear from clients and what did they think and make it safe for them to actually respond. I also think this takes a very strong advisory group with the skills of Barbara Huff to make sure that people are heard and people get a chance to say what they think and to influence the research people like Nicole to make sure they use what the families are saying. And so I think there's more room for bias there than in, I can't say strongly enough about having information that's useful and that is what people really said. So, and we're going to be doing this in a big way. I'm excited about it.
Nicole, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
It was the rural parents, the parents in rural western Kansas that I talked to were absolutely the most concerned and voiced it loudly about safety. And they all said we'd do it. They didn't think any parent would do it on the phone, and that we needed to really look at those alternative ways. That, and they said, you know, rural America is just not always the most trusting. And so anyway, we had to hear that loud and clear. And it goes right along with the question that was just asked.
Yep.
Barbara, I have a question for you. Just because you've probably been involved in systems of care since the phrase was developed. And so I'm wondering what you see as an opportunity for this tool, how it could be used, or what opportunities it presents for Kansas system of care. This family and provider kind of, you know, work that's been going on here.
Right. You know, the first, not the most important, but clearly important, is that families and the family organization have built a real partnership with Nicole, a researcher, an evaluator. And that doesn't always happen in systems of care. Sometimes you're pretty far removed other than maybe having families on a committee. And so this is a different opportunity, because it's what it does then is like when James said, oh gosh, maybe we could make this work for schools, and we've got our pal here who's an evaluator that might help us. And so it leads value, it adds value to what families and family organizations do now and in systems of care. So building that relationship with an evaluator at a university, you know, that doesn't hurt a thing, and we should find that helpful. And I think the whole real-time thing. Sometimes systems of care are over after 4 years, and we really don't have what we need to know about how it all works. And so I think if you started something like this early on, it really would be a way for people to make the corrections, as I mentioned earlier, early.
Great.
So that people really do know, are getting what they need.
Right.
And support.
Thank
Does
you.
that answer it, Pat?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Thank you. Nicole, do you have a slide you can advance?
Pat, I have to say one thing. We are so excited about this that when we wrote our second application for a system of care, which did not get funded, but we were going to use this for all the services like attendant care and therapy, and so we had it's not just about parent support. It's about does everything work, and getting real time, close to it feedback, whatever that looks like. And so that's what we were going to do with it.
Well, I'm glad you said one more thing, because you have us excited now too. Thank you.
Okay.
I want to say a huge thank you again to all of the participants who joined us today, to our presenters who have given so much of themselves today, to Ms. Grant, who's held on the phone with us, and we're really sorry. You know, we have had some glitches. We chose this to be our celebratory learning community. And so this is Fredla's final learning community under this particular NTAC contract. And so we're delighted to share this time with you and to hear so much family voice and family participation in this process. And what's next? We will keep you all posted on what's next. I think Jane carved out a piece of what's next. If people are interested, we would continue to have this kind of discussion in various ways in more depth. in the future. So, you know, stay tuned for what's next because we are excited as well. So we're not going away, just letting you know that. We're not going away. Thank you all. Bye.